All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got this stack of sources, articles, research notes, and we're diving into the history of Bulgaria. It's incredibly rich, complex, often quite dramatic.
It really is. You're looking at a place that's, well, right at this amazing crossroads of cultures, civilizations. Think East meets West, layer upon layer of different peoples leaving their mark over thousands of years.
Exactly. So our mission really is to sift through all this material, pull out the key insights, and give you that shortcut, help you get informed about a country that's showed this remarkable knack for adapting, for enduring through just incredible changes.
Yeah, you'll definitely see how many different influences shaped the land, how ancient its roots really are, and resilience. That's a theme that comes up again and again right from the very beginning. Let's unpack it.
Okay, so digging into the sources. The land we call Bulgaria today, people have lived there for a very, very long time. We're talking Neolithic period, way back.
That's right. Archaeology gives us these fascinating glimpses. Sites like Karantinata, the necropolises at Ezero, Vardim, Sveshtari, they prove people were there continuously for millennia.
But then, maybe around the 6th millennium BC, this major culture pops up. The Thracians?
Yes, the Thracians, primarily farmers, good with livestock, involved in trade. But what really jumps out from the sources is how sophisticated they were, especially their focus on funeral cults.
Funeral cults. How so?
Well, you see it in the sheer number of burial mounds. The sources mention over 4,000 just in the Rhodope Mountains. These weren't simple graves. They were like central to their whole social and spiritual world.
And the sources describe them as one of the most advanced ancient civilizations. That's a pretty bold claim. What's the backup for that?
Oh, the artifacts are stunning. You've got the Varna gold treasures. Some say it's the oldest worked gold anywhere, hundreds of other silver and gold pieces, and the Panagyrus treasure, found in one of those mounds. It's spectacular.
So not just objects, but proof of skill.
Exactly. Advanced metalworking, incredible artistry. It suggests a wealthy society, complex structure. And then there are the tombs, like Kazanlak and Sveshtari, with these amazing frescoes. Just breathtaking art and architecture.
Okay, advanced, ritualistic, wealthy. But there's a catch, isn't there?
There is. A big one for historians. Despite having this advanced culture, a distinct language, they didn't really have a widespread written system. Maybe for some proper names, but that's about it.
Oh, so unlike the Greeks or Romans.
Right. They wrote everything down. With the Thracians, we have the physical evidence, which is amazing, but not their own written narrative telling us their story, their history from their perspective.
That's fascinating. All this culture, but no words left behind. The sources do say they had tribal unions, fought wars, conquered territory, they built hill forts, sang heroic songs, and those big tunes were for leaders lost in battle, each tribe guarding its chief's tomb, like Kazan, like you mentioned. A monument to a fallen hero, essentially.
Fast forward quite a bit now to the second half of the 7th century AD. This is when the Proto-Bulgarians arrive on the scene.
Right, nomadic groups coming from Central Asia, crossing the Danube, led by Khan Asparich.
Correct. They settle in Moesia and Thrace, which were Byzantine provinces, and in 681 they basically subjugate those areas and establish Danube, Bulgaria. That's the beginning of the First Bulgarian Empire.
And it grew fast under rulers like Khan Tervel and Tsar Krum. The sources say Bulgaria was the first Slavo-Byzantine state to actually get official recognition from the Byzantine emperor. That's quite something early on.
It is. Though later, Byzantine pressure due to Arab invasions meant they tightened control, especially over church matters in Bulgaria.
A key thing here, though, was unification, right? Bringing together the different groups already there.
Absolutely crucial. Under the Khans, they started integrating the existing people's descendants of the Thracians, the Slavic tribes who'd settled earlier, into this new Bulgarian nationality.
Khan Asparich seems like the main guy here, the founder. His name apparently means successful, linked to fighting Turks. His battles from 680 to 684 were key. And there was this custom, the sources say, of naming Khans after victories. Shows a real warrior focus.
It does. And even though they were paying tribute to the Turkic Kagane, Asparuch had enough clout to raid Byzantine lands, take towns. The sources stress how they intentionally settled Thracian tribes within the state that helped glue it all together.
So this leads to the First Bulgarian Empire, 7th to 11th centuries. big independent state in the Balkans, aristocratic system, reached its peak size pretty early 8th century.
Yep. And you have rulers like Khan Omertag leaving these impressive stone inscriptions in Old Bulgarian showing that state identity forming, Khan Melamir strengthening the foundations.
But the real turning point, according to the sources, was under Boris I, second half of the 9th century. He brings in Christianity.
Huge. That decision internationalized Bulgaria, tied its future to Christian Europe in a profound way.
Though ultimately, that first empire did fall apart in the later 11th century. The sources mention things like denationalization and consummation, maybe internal weakness, external pressures wearing it down.
Sounds plausible. A combination of factors, likely.
Okay, let's dig into that Christianity decision more. 864. That sounds like a pivotal moment.
Oh, absolutely. More than just religion. It was a political, cultural earthquake. It plugged Bulgaria right into the network of Christian European nations, shaped everything that came after.
How did that change things on the ground? Governance, daily life.
Well, you get new laws based on Christian ideas. Social structures shift. People's whole worldview, their spiritual life gets reframed. And crucially, it brings Bulgaria into much closer direct contact with the Byzantine Empire.
So Byzantine influence starts pouring in. The sources mention the court adopting Byzantine administrative methods, church structures in the 9th century. Monasteries become these bridges for Greek civilization.
Precisely. And adopting Christianity sparked another massive development, the Slavonic alphabet. Saints Cyril and Methodius, their disciples, creating this new script.
And translating texts into it became state policy.
Yes, translating religious texts into Church Slavonic. They even held trials, like evaluations of these texts in the capital. Monasteries became centers of learning, translation, literacy.
Must have caused some friction with the established Greek culture, though.
For sure. The sources talk about debates, polemics between Greeks and Slavs over which language was better. Byzantine church practices, books, relics, art, it all flowed in, influencing Bulgarian literature and art. Some sources say theological and historical writing started merging with moral stories.
But this time, under Boris I, and especially Tsar Simeon I, this is the famous golden age of Bulgarian culture.
It really was. You see the Slavonic society stepping onto the world stage, taking Byzantine culture but making it their own through their own language. The sources even say Slav military victories chipped away at Byzantine territory.
And it wasn't just copying, right? The sources say they were actively shaping their own cultural identity, selecting, adapting, coining something new.
Exactly. A complex creative process, not just imitation.
So Bulgaria's flourishing culture, wealth, power growing. And Byzantium starts getting nervous.
Naturally. That Byzantine jealousy, plus their own strategic goals in the Balkans, it was a constant source of conflict. The sources mention some early attacks in the late 10th century.
Yeah, and the final fall.
The sources paint a picture of chaos contributing to it. Tsar Boris appears to die in 907. His son wasn't as strong. Then Tsar Simeon comes in 926.
Simeon was talented, ambitious, but his massive military buildup against Byzantium, recruiting huge numbers, it apparently sparked a rural uprising. Maybe the burden was too much.
So his ambition kind of backfired internally.
Possibly, but he still had big military wins. In 927, the Byzantines sent an army toward Sofia, but the Bulgarians defeated their rear guard, routed them near Constantinople.
And Simeon pushed on, took Serdica, expanded the border. He did. But the final collapse in 971, it was a mix of things. An invasion by Sviatoslav of Kiev with Pecheneg allies, and critically, Byzantine intrigue. They managed to win over some Bulgarian nobles, the boyars, with promises. That conspiracy helped bring down the capital, led to anarchy.
The impact of that Byzantine conquest.
Yeah.
The sources make it sound devastating, long-lasting.
They describe it as dramatic, shaping the next 1,000 years. The damage was immense, losing their state for centuries, foreign rule, denial of political, social, spiritual life, even losing the right to use their own language officially. That's profound.
Incredibly harsh, yeah.
It was. But interestingly, the sources also suggest a flip side. Being part of the Byzantine world, even under oppression, did open up some new possibilities, maybe brought a dose of realism compared to earlier ideals.
And despite being ruled, they kept fighting back. Rebellions against taxes, oppression.
Constantly. The sources mention countless rebellions. There's even a hagiography of Cyril and Methodius that shows these awful images of Byzantine punishment, suggesting maybe God allowed this harsh rule as a lesson to make people appreciate better governance when they got it back.
And we piece this together from all sorts of sources, right? Writings, letters, even analyzing the language itself, from that time?
Exactly. Narrative sources, literature, letters, linguistic clues, all helping us understand that complex period.
Okay, jumping forward again. Independence is restored in 1186.
Yes, by Senslav II, described as a magnate from Krushevets. The sources call it a blow of thunder, but are careful to say it was a restoration, bringing back what was lost, not just a liberation from scratch.
Right, and the Odrin region also saw changes. This Second Bulgarian Empire gets established fast.
Very fast. The sources mention founding 50 towns and settlements almost immediately.
Which kicks off another Renaissance period, reaching a peak within just 40 years.
It seems so. The sources paint this picture of maybe 300 thriving towns, big and small, amazing architecture, temples, palaces, decorated squares. You see Byzantine wealth, but now within Bulgaria's own framework.
A real golden age again, awakening a sleeping nation, as one source puts it.
Yeah, an awakening to action, cementing that right to a nation-state. The Bulgarian language becomes highly respected, even required in schools. Big reforms in the economy, education, culture.
Tsarevets fortress guarding the capital, Veliko Tarnova, and a key moment in 1235, the Tsar gets recognized as emperor by the Byzantine Emperor of Nicaea.
Huge validation. Just 25 years after Restoration, the Second Empire is a formally recognized power.
But like the first, this era eventually ends too.
It does. The sources point to losing territory to the Serbs in the northwest and, crucially, the Ottomans in the southeast. The fall of the capital, Tarnovo, in 1393. That's the effective end of the Second Empire.
And that ushers in the Ottoman period. Tarnovo falls 1393, Varna 1422. Complete annexation by the mid-15th century.
Yeah, and the sources describe this period, especially the beginning, as dark, brutal. Devastation, violence, slavery, suffering, people forced to move.
Bulgaria's role under the Ottomans becomes mainly providing food and supplies.
Pretty much. Agriculture, food supplier. They controlled key sea routes, of course. Sofia remained important strategically, and crucially, it kept alive that memory of Bulgarian statehood, the hope for independence.
Life under the Ottomans wasn't the same throughout, though. It changed over time.
Definitely. Initially, some local admin might have stayed, lower classes paid tribute, but maybe weren't hit as hard immediately, but that changed. Turkoman, nomads settled, towns became fortified citadels, the Ottoman grip tightened.
And taxes went way up, 40-fold, the sources claim.
Yeah, a massive increase. And 100 years or so after the conquest, life got much, much harder for ordinary people. More taxes, more tribute, feeling helpless against oppression, forced labor. And then you had predatory tax collectors and brigands making things even worse.
The church suffered badly, too.
Severely. Sources mention the congregation being removed in 1439, the church losing real autonomy by the mid-15th century. It stopped being a major national force for a long time. Contact with the West was cut off, Greek knowledge became mostly monastic. Daily life involved high taxes, dealing with often violent overlords. But there was some continuity. Local people often ran village administration, which helped preserve customs. Though rulers' police were often non-Bulgarians using Arabic or Greek.
And the Bulgarian language survived, but picked up Turkish and Arabic words.
Naturally, the administrative system, the beys and pashas, was firmly in place.
The sources don't sugarcoat the brutality, do they? Janissaries showing force, that horrifying story from Vidin.
No, they include those accounts, boiling women, selling people into slavery. It paints a grim picture. Sometimes communities just had to bribe officials to get by.
What about religion? Was there tolerance?
The sources say initially there was some tolerance. Christianity wasn't openly persecuted everywhere. Churches weren't systematically destroyed. But then you have that bishop's letter talking about forced slavery, forbidden church services. Suggests the reality could be much harsher than any official policy. The clergy often felt powerless to protect their people.
Okay, from that darkness, we get to the Bulgarian national revival. Late 18th to mid-19th century, the sources call it a captivating saga.
It really was a powerful resurgence of national feeling, mirroring what was happening elsewhere in Europe.
You see, the Bulgarian language really blossomed, described as the youngest Slavic literary language then, inspiring poets, musicians, artists, celebrating their heritage, but also creating modern forms.
Key figures emerge. Sofrony Verchansi, Pacey Hilandarsky, his history was massively important. They're inspired by French Revolution ideals, freedom, national identity, religious identity. And reforms in Russia apparently helped their efforts too, quietly.
And the movement grew, from culture and education outwards.
Yeah, it expanded into history, social issues, science, philosophy, translating world literature.
A big part was setting up schools, teaching in Bulgarian, focusing on Bulgarian history.
Absolutely fundamental, fostering that separate national consciousness, eventually leading to things like the Bulgarian Academy at Ohrid.
And Pan-Slavism, rising in the mid-19th century, gave it another push.
It did. It bolstered these national movements aiming for independence.
This awakening in Bulgaria also connected with movements in Russia to unite Orthodox peoples under the Tsar, which eventually leads towards the Russo-Turkish War.
Yes, those threads connect. Cultural development marched alongside the political push, standardizing the language, making it accessible. Huge literary output, too. That multi-volume history, the collections of folk songs, celebrating the nation's heritage.
And literature branching out novels, history, biography, plays, sociology, criticism. Figures like Grigory Samblak, Kiri Georgievoy are mentioned.
So building on the revival, the political movement for liberation really picks up steam in the 1860s. Patriotism, Slavic identity, Christian identity, all merging, though ideas were brewing earlier in the 1850s.
Key moments mentioned. That first National Church Council in Sofia, 1861. Petitions denouncing oppression seen as the first big political act of the revival started by the Sofia Church Brotherhood.
Right. And huge petitions sent to the Russian Tsar. Thousands of signatures showing how widespread the desire for change was. Another council in Silistra, though sadly, some violence against Germans and Greeks happened there too.
And an important council in Vratsa in 1867 linked to Russian diplomats trying to get their Tsar involved. A Russian charter even promised land to Bulgarian exiles.
They were definitely trying to build momentum. Plans were made for a general uprising in April 1876, monks spreading the word, some fighting, but a Danish envoy reported the claims of large rebel groups might have been exaggerated.
And the uprising was suppressed by Russian troops, leading to the autonomous province of Eastern Rumelia in 1878, not a fully unified state yet.
Right. There were earlier attempts, too. Georgy Rakovsky's group in 1867 suffered losses. But the 1876 April uprising, even though it was crushed, was significant. It was planned, organized across regions.
3 failed attempts, the sources say, but they were the crucial start of the events that led to independence.
Exactly. And those events climaxed with the Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878. The Russian army crosses the Danube, bombards fortresses, Romania joins in.
First fighting early 1877, towns taken, Sofia occupied as a strategic point.
The siege of Pleven was huge. Started summer 77. Ottomans held out. Russians took heavy losses trying to break it in July, August, October.
But a flanking move in November 77 finally worked. After days of fighting, Pleven falls, a turning point.
Definitely. Why the war? Russia wanted more influence in the Balkans, needed to weaken the Ottomans. Serbian and Montenegrin uprisings were happening. Bulgarian committees stirred unrest, hoping for a joint attack with Greece and Serbia.
The failed 1876 uprising had been the first spark, followed by brutal Ottoman reprisals that shocked Europe. Serbia declared war in 76.
So the sources really stress how vital this war was for Bulgaria's fate, tying it directly to Russia. Russia declared war. The Ottomans were defeated quickly by early 1878. Russian influence became dominant in Bulgaria,
which led to the Treaty of San Stefano in March 1878. That proposed a big, autonomous Bulgaria.
But that wasn't the final word. The Congress of Berlin happened in July 78. The great powers stepped in to redraw the map again. Russia had to negotiate.
And the result for Bulgaria at Berlin was scaled back.
Significantly. It became a self-governing principality, but within the Ottoman Empire. Still had to pay tribute, technically dependent. The territory Bulgaria got was way smaller than San Stefano promised. Huge losses. The sources see this as Bismarck's policy, keep the peace, by creating smaller buffer states, managing the big powers' interests, even if it meant less freedom for the local people.
Tsar Alexander II's motives are described as mixed statesmanship, duty, protecting Orthodox Slavs. But the whole episode just shows the clash of interests, national, ethnic, imperial, all playing out in the Balkans.
Okay, fast forward to the early 20th century. The Balkan Wars, 1912-1913. Hugely significant, shaping the whole century for the region, Greece, Montenegro, Serbia, and especially Bulgaria.
These nations had suffered under Ottoman rule since 1878. Executions, expulsions. By the late 19th century, dreams of uniting their peoples in nation-states were really strong, with secret societies pushing for it.
The Young Turk movement offered a glimmer of change, but the sources suggest that before 1912, Bulgarian prospects were kind of stuck. Their own elite couldn't quite get on the same page strategically.
So Bulgaria decides to take the lead, but maybe too forcefully. The sources mention adamant claims over Macedonia, rejecting compromise.
Yeah, it seems they took a hard line, which limited options for Serbia and Greece. The Macedonian question became this central fiery issue for Bulgarian patriotism, especially after Bulgaria declared itself a sovereign empire in 1908, aiming to absorb parts of Macedonia and Thrace they saw as ethnically Bulgarian.
Which worried Romania, saw it as a threat.
Yeah, exactly. Romania then claimed southern Dobruja, a region with a mixed population, partly as a counterweight. Then came the Second Balkan War in 1913. The former allies fighting each other over the spoils from the First War against the Ottomans. This gave Romania the chance to invade Bulgaria and annex southern Dobruja,
Leading to the Treaty of Bucharest in August 1913, described as harsh for Bulgaria, losing southern Dobruja other territories, and disputes continued.
The cost was immense. The sources put numbers on it. Between Bucharest in 1913 and Neuilly after WWI in 1919, Bulgaria lost something like 352,000 square kilometers, over 80% of its pre-war territory, and population reduced by 1.5 million, over 25%, plus refugees.
The aftermath sounds grim. Persecution, humiliation, isolation. The Treaty of Neuilly added more restrictions. Militarily, maybe comparable to other defeated nations, but on territory, Serbia, Greece, Romania had the advantage.
But paradoxically, the sources say these disastrous wars also fueled this enduring surge in national spirit, political awareness. Public passion for the national cause became deeply ingrained.
Fostering unity, focus on training, education, production for the nation.
Yes. And the army gained this powerful, symbolic role guardian of freedom. The idea of a people's army grew strong. New military schools were seen as vital for national culture. They really tried to rearm and reorganize despite the restrictions. Sending commissions, teachers helping organize, setting up workshops, dealing with shortages everywhere.
Moving into World War I, Bulgaria's position sounds precarious. Surrounded, a pawn again. Sources put a lot of blame on the leadership in Sofia.
Yeah, foreign policy described as careless, naive, impotent. Hopes for Russian help against Serbia and the Ottomans didn't pan out, so they ended up siding with the Central Powers.
Propaganda tried to sell the war, but doubt and dissent grew.
Definitely. Stories of victories for the alliance, defeats for Balkan neighbors, but people grew discontented, which leads to that September 1918 revolt, described as spontaneous, civil and military, no real political leadership, just panic and despair after years of hardship, disaffection, imprisonment since 1913.
And after WWI, more treaties dictated Bulgaria's fate. Neuilly-sur-Seine, 1919, Washington Treaty. Heavy reparations, more territory lost.
Huge losses again. Sources lament what was left. Just parts of Thrace, Purian Macedonia, a bit of southern Dobruja.
Dobruja to Romania, Vardar region to Serbia, Yugoslavia, Aegean region, Thessaloniki to Greece, Western outlands to Serbia. Sofia ended up really exposed, surrounded by hostile neighbors who'd gained land.
Military losses too. Navy sunk, lost access to the Black Sea.
Social conditions worsened, property confiscated. Economic challenges, state monopolies versus private enterprise, extravagant spending mentioned.
All right, World War II. Bulgaria again caught in the middle, eventually aligning with the Axis in 1941, favoring Germany.
Initially, no immediate territory changes like before, but young men joined the army, preparations were visible, planes, tanks.
When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 41, Bulgaria, as an ally, was obligated to declare war on the USSR, though they didn't actually send troops to fight on the Eastern Front.
But after Stalingrad in 1943, when the tide turned against Germany, the Bulgarian government got nervous. Hopes of gaining territory from the Axis alliance faded. Uncertainty grew.
Yes, German forces had entered Bulgaria back in April 41 with government consent under Operation Meretsi. They established authority quickly. The Bulgarian army mostly stayed passive then.
But resistance grew. An anti-fascist movement.
It did. Among soldiers, the population fueled by Axis losses. Organizations formed from late 41, often with a communist core, like the Workers' Democratic Front. It escalated. The Rila Partisan Brigade formed in 42, attacked police stations. Armed struggle began. More brigades formed through 42, 43. By spring 44, as a military regime took tighter control, the anti-fascist movement peaked.
Leading to the September 9, 1944 revolt, or coup. Sources say it was well prepared, involving parts of the army and population. A national assembly convened, restored the constitution, set up people's courts, started reforms.
The previous government, tied to the Axis, was basically finished.
The new government focused on immediate problems, setting up a new state order, purging the military, trials for collaborators.
Redirecting the economy aiming to align with the Allies, coordinate trade within a planned socialist model. The sources use pretty strong language describing the forces involved before 44. Unarmed working class versus armed vampires, gangsters, informers.
Mentions solidarity versus betrayal by military intelligence, even King Boris III. The takeover is described as brutal, bloody, attempts to moderate it failed, turned into a crazy carnage. Strong measures against the old elite: exile, prison, execution, humiliation.
The state went after perceived enemies while propaganda worked the public.
So after a WWII, new battle lines: capitalism versus socialism, but really Soviet Union versus the West.
Right. The sources say as the West seemed to lose its grip on Eastern Central Europe, the Soviets moved to consolidate control country by country. In Bulgaria, this happened with the Soviet army actively present after the so-called liberation.
The new regime established September 44, a coup organized by the Soviets and the Bulgarian Communist Party, BCP, whose leaders returned from exile. The Fatherland Front took power.
Then came repressions between 44 and early 47, even as there were some initial nods to media liberalization. Opposition parties were crushed: bribery, force, imprisonment, killing leaders like those from the Agrarian Union.
By 1949, free expression was basically gone. Media silenced. It went deep, repressing critical actors, dancers, banning theaters. One source even mentions cartoon characters being sent to labor camps. Just shows the totality of control.
There were some shifts after Khrushchev denounced Stalin in 56. Changes in BCP leadership. Some high-profile figures from the repression era faced consequences: prison, exile, execution.
The Fatherland Front, communist-dominated, initially thought about keeping the monarchy for stability, but Moscow pressured them. Tsar Simeon II, Boris III's young son, was forced out. Monarchy abolished September 15, 1946.
A referendum followed, monarchy versus republic. Fatherland Front candidate won. New constitution, December 46, established the People's Republic of Bulgaria.
Declared itself heir to the anti-fascist struggle, tasked with building the new socialist order.
And the economy, centrally planned. State-owned everything: economy, politics, society. Strict limits on everything. Yes, near 100% employment, but zero freedom: economic, political, religious, public expression. Scientific communism was the only game in town.
Then, 1989, communism collapses across Eastern Europe. A huge moment.
Bulgaria had lived under that repressive system for decades. Change was in the air elsewhere. The first public protest in Sofia, September 89, by intellectuals. Police shut it down fast, still tight control.
But the big change started suddenly, November 10, 1989. An internal move. Todor Zhivkov, leader for 35 years, ousted, followed by shifts in party and state leadership.
That created this vacuum, right, filled quickly by new opposition groups, leaders changing rapidly, mass rallies supporting the changes. Lots of groups popped up, though one became dominant fairly quickly.
The ruling party, shifting its stance, opened the door for quick talks about change. The Interior Ministry said it wanted dialogue. New organizations bloomed. The party leadership issued a declaration of change.
Even the National Intelligence Service, the security apparatus, was told publicly by the party to bow before the people. An incredible signal trying to build trust.
Media started discussing it, TV, radio, but still uncertain. Leaders claimed they were cleaning house, no more informers at demos, admitted they were caught off guard by the speed.
The transition itself from that centralized system to a more open, liberal one is generally called peaceful. Democratic governments came in, focused on democracy, freedom, good relations with neighbors.
But huge problems were inherited, right? Deformations from the old system, demographic issues, environmental damage.
Yes. And the sources describe a sharp economic drop during the rapid, sometimes brutal, privatization and restructuring. Worker strikes, production collapsing in places, unemployment soaring, social problems. Old habits died hard.
Social inequality grew. Fixing basic services like kindergartens became tough, expensive. The sources asked these big questions. Who could actually fix things? What rules applied? How could ordinary people keep power? Did the state really grasp what needed doing, industrially and socially?
Now, here's an interesting point where the sources seem to differ a bit. While mostly described as peaceful, one source states specifically that after the 1990 election, socialists slightly ahead, a military coup restored communism and a political battle began between the socialists and the UDF. We have to report that assertion as it appears, noting this claim of a coup and the subsequent political struggle.
Later, the socialists won in '94 under Sergei Skanushev, continued reforms.
But by '97, massive protests erupted: political violence, banks collapsing, hyperinflation. The UDF pushed for early elections, got support. UDF leader Ivan Kostov won in early '99, shook up the government significantly, according to one source.
His government stabilized the economy, got foreign investment. But the sources also say corruption, crime laundries became systemic, mafia influence grew.
That's what's noted. The UDF lost in September 2001 to Simeon Saxe-Coburgatsky. New forces emerged. Sources describe this phase complexly. A sense of independence rediscovered, mixed with a shift from pragmatism to a rude normalization of relations with big, global players, potentially neo-colonial.
And it was during this period that talks for NATO and EU membership formally began. So after that turbulent transition, the focus shifts firmly towards Europe. Post-89 governments prioritize market economy, liberal democracy, start the EU integration process. New constitution in 1990 helps.
Developing closer economic ties with the EU was key, adopting the EU's laws, the acquis.
The association agreement in December 95 set up a free trade area, partnerships in social, cultural, political areas.
And the formal EU membership application in June 96. That really kicked off intensive reforms, parliament procedures, applying to NATO, Council of Europe, OECD too. The goal was clear: rejoin Europe, rejoin the world.
A center-right government came in late 96 after those mid-90s crises. Implemented big reforms, new currency board fixing the lev. EU institutions gave positive feedback. Ports like Burgas, Varna were earmarked for modernization.
They had a 3-year action plan, 9901, aiming to hit EU standards legislation, growth rates, customs union, common transport policy were priorities.
The Cologne European Council, November 99, rated Bulgaria well, candidate status confirmed, target 2006 for finishing talks. Nice summit, November 2000, officially started negotiations.
EU requirements pushed major modernizations. Customs regime tightened fewer access points. Streamlined laws, electronic declarations, upgraded facilities with EU funding.
NATO membership came in 2004, and finally EU membership on January 1st, 2007. Part of that big enlargement wave.
The results: pretty favorable integration overall, gradual progress, free movement of people, goods increased even though they're not fully in Schengen yet.
But there are still ongoing discussions within the EU, concerns about rule of law, human rights, corruption, though member states aren't always united on it.
Right. The sources mention periodic issues, sanctions applied elsewhere, and a general feeling that the future direction of the EU itself is a bit unclear.
Relations with neighbors seem generally good, though, especially after a 1994 treaty.
Mostly, yes. Different approaches to some Balkan countries, but generally positive, building on shared history and culture despite past conflicts.
The current political scene sounds complex, not just simple market democracy. Geopolitics matter, the legacy of Ottoman rule, communism. It all plays a part.
Elites sometimes resistant to Western models, but also surprising stability during the transition, contrary to some predictions.
No massive conversion of the old Communist Party, no huge mass democratic movement like in Western Europe. One source mentions that economic collapse around 9701 led to demands for liberalism and describes the landscape after 14 years as oddly similar to an ex-Texas, opening a curious analogy from the source.
Let's circle back to Bulgaria's identity for a moment. The sources stress this mix: ethnic, linguistic, religious, cultural variety. The national identity itself hasn't been diluted. It's remained strong.
And the foundations really go back to the First Empire, 9th century. Cyril and Methodius, the Slavic alphabet, that first school in Pliska, giving them their own distinct written culture.
But conflict with neighbors later chipped away at that First Empire invasion, tribute, faith being imposed.
Then Ottoman rule after the 14th century. That profoundly impacted identity. Core elements altered, maybe lost for periods. Faith shifted, for some under pressure, Catholicism in the West, Islam in the East. And the Ottomans tried to suppress the language, seeing it as key to identity.
Yet, influence from Byzantium and the Ottomans didn't erase everything. It fed into this unique folk culture that survived within the Ottoman system, the millets, which allowed some religious self-governance.
Then the revival. The elite reemerges, consciously pushing for national identification. Resistance fueled by collective memory songs, stories, epics, Christian faith.
Yeah, the Renaissance was a direct pushback against losing that identity, losing the language, the folk culture. Sources mention two big external forces shaping it: the constant presence of Islamic culture and the gradual arrival of Western European ideas, education, politics, new literary forms.
Let's talk language. South Slavic, lots of dialects, but the literary form unified during the revival. Southern dialects became dominant in writing, influenced other Slavic languages historically except Russian, Polish, Serbian, the sources note.
Right, they distinguish Bulgarian, Macedonian, Serbian dialects, map out where they were spoken.
That 893 revolt tied to adopting Slavonic literacy. Massively important.
Huge. Awakened hope, inspired Renaissance across all Slavs, deeply affected the Bulgarian soul. Critics cited in the sources call it a world-class cultural event, gave South Slavs a powerful literary language, shaped their political, religious, literary future. Church Slavonic literature from then, definitely composed in Bulgaria.
And the folklore, described as incredibly rich, skillfully developed.
One of Europe's best. Not just quaint tradition, woven into daily life, holidays, rites of passage, work, dances, costumes, songs, music, games. Ethnic groups contributing to this unique blend. Village life, especially dependent on music, singing, dancing styles, vary by region.
And there's been a long effort to study and preserve it, giving depth to national consciousness.
For over a century, researchers use folk arts in plays, shows, festivals. Traditional festivals spread, become national showcases. Clubs work to keep it alive. State institutions too, archives, institutes, studying musical folklore. The National Museum of Folklore preserves artifacts. That big festival every 5 years sounds amazing songs, music, dances from all over.
Sources emphasize this unique Bulgarian spirit in folklore, the ornamentation in voice, music, dance. A sense of ascent in the jigs unlike anything else in Europe.
Thinking about international relations, Bulgaria's position, its territory, always shifting based on Balkan politics, wider regional powers, so many influences.
Ancient Greece, Rome, Byzantium, Ottomans, then Russia, Austria, Germany, Soviet Union, USA, all playing roles in the state's emergence, development. Sometimes its dissolution.
First millennium AD. Mostly shaped by Byzantium, the Orthodox Church.
After Christianization in 865, Latin influence was shut out for centuries, only reappearing in the 19th-20th. As an Orthodox state, Bulgaria was very sensitive to how Orthodox people were treated in the Ottoman Empire, often looking for Western support.
Then, in the 20th century, during those wars for national unification, Bulgaria often leaned pro-German, hoping that alliance would help achieve territorial goals, especially Macedonia, Thrace.
Siding with Germany in WWI and WWII, defined relations with the Allies, UK, France, USA, and shaped the initial approach to the Soviets.
Post-1989, a complete U-turn in foreign policy, seeking ties with the West, EU, consistent policy across different governments, EU and NATO integration.
Those sanctions post-89 over actions regarding Montenegro, Serbia apparently hindered early integration efforts, put them on the periphery.
Seems so. Reconnecting with the world picked up pace later, especially after Clinton's election, end of the Bosnian War. Fall of the Iron Curtain allowed them to learn from Central Europe's transitions.
Playing a role in the Afghanistan war post-2001 is mentioned, providing airspace, bases, medical supplies freely, gained political points, but maybe created ambiguity too.
A major decision highlighted. Inviting U.S. nuclear inspections, getting debt pardoned.
And the sources loop back again to the Balkan Wars, 1912-13, their lasting impact. Ottoman suffering, fueling national dreams.
Reiterating that point about the Bulgarian elite's issues pre-1912 and Bulgaria's maybe overly assertive stance on Macedonia dividing potential allies.
Declaring an empire in 1908, aiming to expand, seen as a threat by Romania, leading to Romania claiming southern Dobruja, invading in 1913, harsh Treaty of Bucharest, the unresolved fight over Macedonia with Serbia involving great powers just continued. So wrapping this immense story up, over 1,300 years of history since the 7th century state. Dramatic shifts, culture, politics, destiny often tied to rulers, and the bigger geopolitical game.
And despite hitting rock bottom sometimes, on the brink, the sources really highlight that Bulgarian resilience, choosing revival, renaissance, a collective effort bringing back political, cultural, ethnic independence.
It's also clear there are different ways to view these events, right?
Yeah.
Shaped by politics, education, debates continue. Questions about facts, demand for answers.
Yeah, and many facts only came out recently. Personal stories, hidden documents, stuff concealed for ages due to fear, repression, now getting scientific attention.
But questions remain, open to interpretation about the original Proto-Bulgarians, the real cost of independence, the meaning of motherland, the very nature of the state at different times.
And the sources point to this really painful fact. Roughly half the lands historically Bulgarian ended up outside the modern state's borders. That had huge consequences for language, ethnicity, the church, national separations, without full recognition elsewhere.
That suffering from lack of territorial integrity, the sources call it unparalleled, decades of it.
And while there might be cultural differences among these scattered groups, the sources say language wasn't a barrier to communication.
Ultimately, the sources conclude with this idea, that it's the duty of nations today to work through these differences, harmonize them for a better future. Wow, that was quite a journey. from ancient Thracians and Proto-Bulgarians through empires, revivals, conflicts, communism, right up to the EU.
What strikes me most is that resilience, you know, preserving identity, culture through centuries of foreign rule, unbelievable conflict.
And understanding that deep history, it really does give you crucial context for Bulgaria today, its place in the world.
It definitely leaves you thinking, how do these historical narratives, these unresolved issues from way back, the memory of trauma, how does all that continue to shape a nation's identity, its relationships, even now in our interconnected world?
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.